Hello, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming here. It's beautiful for your opening night in the it's a festival on the Gelijkheid. My name is Hala and I work as a curator for this festival. And before we commence this evening with our guests Mohammed el-Kurd, Samah Hijawi, Adriaan de Roover, Hala El Mohor, and the people of Manoeuvre, Deze, I would like to say a few words. And before I start, I would like to mention that the night will be video recording. And sometimes during a class, the cameras will turn towards you. If you don't want to be in the picture, you just do this signal with your hands. Is that fair? Can everyone see? Yeah? And then after an edit, you will cut. The words that we're saying will be in Dutch. Sorry, first that you were speaking here are we gone in a few minutes. I would just like to set the tone for the evening and the following days. Angst voor het bestaan. Met angst en vreemdeling in de gaten kieker ik hem de deur uit. Tot het bad overloopt, tranen langs trappen afglijden en onzekerheid de drempel passeert. Angst is eiteren daar met het huis van kolonial. Angst om te zijn. We leven in een tijd waarin angst een vreemde, maar toch constante metgezel lijkt te zijn. Angst om jezelf te zijn, angst voor het oordeel van een ander, angst om te spreken, maar ook om te zwijgen. Angst kan verlaat weggen, kan een stilzetting. Maar hier, bij dit festival, willen we juist tegen die angst ingaan. We kiezen voor aandacht, voordat het nog onbekend is, maar nog vaak onbewust. Voordat wat nog onbevangen mag worden ontdekt. En we kiezen voor liefde, voor elkaar, voor een ander en ook voor onszelf. Liefde kan revolutie veroorzaken, is de zin die deze tiende editie van het festival draagt. Het is een verwijzing naar het essay Liefde en Revolutie van filosoof Spiegelweg. Ze haalt erin de iconische woorden van Gil's Coherent aan. The revolution will not be codified. In een interview legde Gil uit dat zijn woorden betekenen dat je nooit precies kunt vastleggen wat mensen echt in beweging zet. De revolutie is niet te vangen in beeld. Het is een innerlijke verschuiving die je pas herkent wanneer ze er al is. Revolutie begint in je hoofd. Dit jaar zijn we geconfronteerd met vele beelden. Vele beelden en verhalen van vreugde, maar ook van verdriet, van pijn. Soms dichtbij, soms verloren. De genocide is televised. Maar hoe transformeren we al zien in actie? Hoe zorgen we dat het iets verandert, dat het iets doet? De komende 4 dagen hopen je te inspireren. We willen je hoop geven. We willen je het gevoel geven dat je wordt gezien. En samen creëren we een warme deken waarmee we dit najaar afsluiten. Curieus doet dat dit jaar met meer dan 200 bijdragers in de vorm van onder andere sprekers, workshopgevers, illustratoren en filmmakers. Met meer dan 40 partners, meer dan 70 vrijwilligers, 20 medewerkers en 2 stagiairs. Maar vooral ook met jullie, want zonder jullie is er geen dialoog. Het gesprek leeft door jullie aanwezigheid. Geniet van deze avond, van de ontmoetingen en van de momenten. Merci. And now I will switch back to English. So, almost finished. For opening nights, we have the pleasure to welcome the poet, author, and journalist Mohammed el-Kurd. The profits made tonight will be donated to the Hope Foundation. Following the war in 2021, Hope initiates its cultural emergency fund. Through this fund, they are able to offer many rural artists and teachers the opportunity to support children who are suffering the consequences of war and destruction in times of great loss and emotional damage. They aim to use this fund to provide whatever is needed, whenever or wherever, to offer the children of Gaza some comfort. Having this fund at their disposal gives them the chance to quickly and accurately respond to any questions for help, without having to go through lengthy procedures or fill out complicated application forms. The fund enables their trusted staff members on location in Gaza to immediately respond to the great needs of the children
there as soon as the situation allows it. We are happy to be supporting them tonight. Behind me here are the people of Manoeuvre VZW. They are embroidering the names of the martyrs in Palestine and have been doing so for over a year, and we are delighted that they're joining us here tonight. Now I will step away and I will invite Mohammed el-Kurd to the stage. Will you please give him a warm welcome?
Thank you. You're feeding my ego, so thank you. Sure. Does anyone here speak Arabic? Great, great. Good to know. Now? No, I'm joking. I just want to know who speaks Arabic, so I know what to say under my breath. It's good to be here. It's not my first time in, what's this country? It's not my first time in Belgium. I came to Brussels to the European Parliament when I was 12 years old to talk to European parliamentarians, because of course they would only listen to children, because they're not going to listen to men and women and adults. I don't remember anything from that year, but I remember I went to the parliament, I had some fake glasses, and I talked to the European Parliament about being expelled from my home in Sheikh Jarrah, and they were like, wow, you're so courageous, we're going to give more money to Israel. And I left. And so it's good to be back to, what was it? Belgium, and not to be talking to parliamentarians. Yay. Before I got on stage, I asked them to teach me how to say death to Zionism in Dutch, but I forgot, so anyone? Again? Thank you. Great. Okay, good. I'm gonna read, now it's gonna get boring. I'm gonna read from my new book. I have a new book coming out. It was supposed to be out, but it's gonna come out soon. Called Perfect Victims, and I'm going to read from the book. Every so often, a Zionist comes out and says it. How's the voice? Can you hear me good? Okay, cool. Great. Every so often, a Zionist comes out and says it. Perhaps a politician boasting, we are now rolling out the Gaza Nakba, or Beirut must burn, or defending a soldier's right to rape Palestinian prisoners. One does not need to dig deep to discover an abundance of genocidal, racist, and expansionist rhetoric from Israeli public figures, be it on television, social media, or articles, or whatever. Such statements are not always uttered with such insolence and hubris. Sometimes it is a prudent revelation or an accidental admission straight from the horse's mouth. Occasionally, a liberal Zionist newspaper runs a headline confirming that Israel is a settler colonial state, or prints an op-ed by a formal attorney general who asserts, we established an apartheid regime in the occupied territories. Sometimes we cite the Zionist pioneers, Zionism forefathers, Herzl, Jabotinsky, so on, so forth. But such revelations are also occasionally propelled by a sense of moral urgency. An Auschwitz survivor will say, never again for anyone, or a young refusenik will publicly oppose occupation, or it is moral superiority. A settler in Palestine will make a film about other worse settlers who laugh as they testify about Tantura, where they buried our ancestors in mass graves, a massacre we have narrated for decades with visceral recollection in our movies, in our novels, in our songs, in our oral histories. On other occasions, it is remorse that takes them to the confession booth. A soldier, the font is so small I can barely read, hold on. Sorry. But basically, I'm talking to you about the different kinds of reasons why Israelis or Jewish Israelis might feel like they have to testify against occupation. And sometimes it is remorse. A soldier suffers a pang of consciousness and decides to break his silence. After a long career of maiming children or hunting protesters for sport, he comes clean, under legal immunity of course, about all the heinous acts he has committed in our towns and refugee camps. He can't sleep, he has PTSD, so naturally he embarks on a speaking tour across universities after he takes a year off to go to India and do psychedelics. He embarks on a speaking tour across universities where he is met with applause and platitudes. He professes his sins in the confessional of a brightly lit stage, and the audience, unscathed, entertained, grants him a plenary indulgence. He is courageous. And we are obsessed with these confessions in literature, in media, and many activists in civil society circles. We are quick to quote those peoples, the Zionist pioneers, the foul-mouthed politicos, the soldiers who shoot and cry. We rush to invoke the belated miraculous epiphanies of Israeli human rights organizations, the epiphanies of former ministers who corroborate our aged allegations. But as much as people like to hear it from the horse's mouth, that mouth is not always reliable. Israeli officials are proficient and highly trained in the art of pretenses. They are maestros of hypocrisies and half-truths. They can justify murder and theft in between the lines, using dizzyingly beautiful language. But I know I am native to Jerusalem, whether Jabotinsky admits it or not. And reading Herzl is no prerequisite to understanding that Zionists have colonized Palestine. It is enough to look around the ruins of countless depopulated villages, at the bulldozers and the freshly erected flags, to find the ubiquitous evidence of ethnic cleansing staring you right in the face. I could tell you in vivid details about my grandmother's Nakbeh and my own, just as the Lebanese could tell you about Sabra and Shatila, about the 1982 invasion, about the invasion being carried out as I write these words, just as the Egyptians could tell you about the war of attrition in '96, the 1970 bombing of Bahr al-Baqar primary school, just as the Iraqis could tell you about the Baghdad bombings in the 1950s. I see their flames devouring our cities. I hear the long ignored cries of our political prisoners, subjected to most perverse kinds of violence, and I wait for the Israeli correspondent to break the story that Palestinian journalists have broken once, twice, so many times before. Why do we give the authority of narration to those who have murdered and displaced us, when the scarcity of their guilt means honesty is unlikely? Why do we wait for those carrying the batons to confess when our bruised bodies tell the whole truth? Palestinians can speak or be only spoken for through slick rhetorical devices, pandering, and favorable endorsements. Such practices have dominated Western institutions for decades, producing a muzzled, undignified discourse and keeping advocacy efforts on a tight leash. And in a mainstream hostile to Palestinian, one resorts to a formulaic approach to talking about Palestine. Writers and filmmakers, for instance, frequently begin their essays and documentaries by denouncing anti-Semitism. The savvier ones choose a subtler tactic, introducing the viewer to a Notori Karta member, donning a kufiya, or starting the reader's journey in Yad Vashem. The analysis in these projects is habitually sourced from liberal Israeli correspondents and Western commentators. And history is cited and penned by Israeli scholars. I know this from first-hand experience because, as I told you, I would go talk to these people about our experiences in Sheikh Jarrah and in occupied Jerusalem and the West Bank, and they did not care too much about what I had to say. They only wanted to see the bruises on our bodies, the wounds that we hold, and they left the analysis for themselves and for their Israeli counterparts. We were never bright enough to offer the analysis and the framing. We were only ever offering our wounds. I just made that up on the spot, it's good. Obviously, this formula that I'm talking about is kind of pervasive across mediums. You see it in film, in music, in books, whatever. And it's these kind of techniques are fallacious. Like when we're kind of, I'm just not going to read, honestly. When we're talking about, like when we're citing, Ilan Pappé, the Israeli historian, or Benny Morris, the Israeli historian, or when we say even Bet Salem, an Israeli human rights organization, says that this is apartheid, this is fallacious because we are not relying on these sources because they are human rights organizations or because they are historians, but because they are Jewish. It is their Jewishness that allows them the permission to narrate. And this is flawed because it does not rely on their expertise, on their field, on their professions. It doesn't rely on actually what characteristics they bring to the table. It's only identitarian. And sure, one could say that it's a strategy, but this strategy of overusing Western voices and Israeli voices and Amnesty International, human rights organizations, it reveals something about your audience. If you feel that you can only speak about Palestine through these rhetorical devices, through citing Israeli sources, through citing Human Rights Watch, that if you feel that it's too controversial to cite Palestinian voices, then you have accepted fundamentally that your audience is racist. That is the issue. If your audience refuses to listen to Palestinians, because it's not, thank you for the applause, it's not so much so that the Palestinian knowledge production is subpar or that Israeli knowledge production is superior. We have our own historians, people know Rashid Khaldi, amazing historian. We have Arif al-Arif, we have Salman Abu Sitte, we have Rosemary Janeh Zahlan, we have Al-Haq Al-Damir, we have Adala Legal Center, we have so many organizations, so many scholars, but we're constantly relying on these Western sources. But what I find to be a bit funny is that when we finally arrive in these books or in these documentaries, when the Palestinian voice finally arrives there, we are not protagonists or history makers or even complex characters. We are just wounded people. It's not that we are history makers, it's that history stomps on our bodies. In 1983, actually I'm going to skip this part, it's not important right now. I'll give you another example. Like, for example, people love the genre of Israelis and Palestinians making films together. It's like porn to people. It's so masturbatory. But when we're talking about Israeli-Palestinian films, no one, not the producer, like when we invite Israeli-Palestinian directors to come to a film festival, no one, not the producer at the festival, not the columnists writing reviews about these films, not ourselves when we talk about these films, we're seldom ever talking about the content of the film. We are talking, and we're never talking about whether it's a good film or a garbage film. What matters most is that the film was co-directed, right? That's what we talk about. That's what people leave. They're not hearing about like the film about Masafer Yatta and what's happening in Masafer Yatta. It's just though there is these two guys who, it's like you're eavesdropping on a forbidden conversation. It feels masturbatory. It feels so taboo that you're like intrigued by it. And our poets also, sometimes are in books, and everyone here knows Mahmoud Darwish, for example, right? No? Yeah? Cool. I see some people talking. Anyway, our poets seem to make it into these books, but most of the time they perform an ornamental function, صح? They're not. Academics use Palestinian poets to aestheticize their research. They're placed in the epigraphs of nonfiction books, but they're not really looking for poets for framing. Yes, we hear Mahmoud Darwish all the time, but we seldom hear Mahmoud Darwish who says, we seldom encounter the Mahmoud Darwish who tells the colonizers, do not pass between us like flying insects. Pile your illusions in a deserted pit and be gone. Live wherever you like, but do not live amongst us. Die wherever you like, but do not die amongst us. Or the dervish who warns, but if I hunger, I eat the flesh of my rapist. In fact, that line is often mistranslated. They defang him. They have to defang Mahmoud Darwish before they could recite him. And I want to end here, but I want to ask you all the question. It's rhetorical, yani, don't answer. But I want to ask you all, what is the psychic cost of creating one's self-image through staring at a distorted and manipulated reflection? Or in other words, what is the price of us asking others to constantly speak for us? Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, there I am. My name is Samah Hijawi. It's an honor for me to be speaking with Mohammed. It's the first time we meet, so this is a bit of a fresh conversation. I would have actually liked you to continue standing on the podium, but they invited me here. I wore my dress. They mentioned my name, so... we're going to talk through a bit of the book, although honestly that I really did want you to just maybe continue from there. The book is, I can't wait for it to come out. I wish it was already out because I almost managed to finish it, and it took me by storm, and what it did is it was about the language that you use coming from poetry, but also speaking the generational weight, the pain, the violence, and taking the small thing that my grandmother would say, you know, about the symbolic things, about the key, about the word, that we're very busy with. You took it and you unpacked it ferociously, if that's a good word to use. You didn't hesitate at all to say it. And I felt that that was something that we needed, because I have been struggling for the last year, thinking, is there space still for words? Can we describe? I keep feeling that words fail me in this moment. So I thank you for that.
Thank you.
There was a paper that had my introductory notes, and of course it's decided to disappear. It's on the ground. It doesn't want to be here. And what I thought was extremely important was the fact that you not only took this, you're not speaking to a Western audience. You know, by the end of it, you also pull yourself in, you pull me in, and this is extremely, it reminded me, because there was anger, there was wit, there was poetry, and there was a bit of this dark humor which reminded me of Edward Said, where suddenly he'll stick in a sentence and actually make you laugh in the middle of all of the heaviness. And it was, for me, something in which you were able to talk about systematically how it is to experience the violence, but also emotionally and physically. And at the same time, you were turning this mirror and asking me to question and how I present myself. And I was even hesitating, should I wear the tobe or should I not wear the tobe? But I want to wear the tobe because it's from my mother and because it's embroidered, and we have embroidery here today, and we talked about women and gender, and so this is my mother here with us today, who's just in Jordan. She hasn't gone further than that yet, so thankfully. But I wanted to maybe pull from the beginning of the book, because I really wanted you to continue speaking about what you were saying. What struck me is about this humanity, about language, the language that we're using, the way we're responding to the media, but also how it's influencing how we perceive ourselves. And you talk about how this humanization actually restricts the range of emotions that we are permitted to use. And I want from there, maybe if you want to go into those ideas around how we are using a particular vernacular when responding. And it's this response, it's the who are we speaking to that I feel could be a nice way to maybe begin a little bit about the subject of are we how we're trying to convince people that they should believe us. And then you can take it wherever to answer my question even.
First of all, it's my honor to be here. Thank you for having me. And thank you for these really kind words about the book. Yani essentially what I was trying to do with this book, and honestly when you read, you should read it and whatever, you should read it and buy it so I can make more books. But when you read it, a lot of you are going to think like, I know this stuff. Like a lot of you, and I hope a lot of you will read it and think like this is reaffirming things that I've thought about for a long time. So, the idea of humanization is something that I grew up with because I grew up in this neighborhood where we were constantly scrutinized like, under a media microscope, and we were constantly told to humanize ourselves. And we say this a lot, like we say humanize, we need stories that humanize Palestinians, blah, blah, blah. But when you dig through or you just like peel a layer, you understand that this humanity that everybody's talking about is actually very stingy. It's a very stingy, limited, restricted humanity. It means that you have to be, if you're lucky, like a citizen of a certain country, right? If you're like a journalist who's killed by the Israelis and you happen to be a UK citizen, that helps you become human. Or that if you are an artist, or if you're a woman or a child or whatever, and if you're a man, you have to be elderly and frail. There's these like prerequisites. They're quite ethnocentric. You have to kind of mirror the Western subject. You have to look like your Western ally in order for the Western ally to be in solidarity with you. And in recent months even, I've noticed that and ultimately, like this humanization is kind of a defanging, right? You want to communicate to your audience that the Palestinian you're advocating on behalf of them, they are docile and incapable of harm. They would never hurt a fly. They would never hurt anything. And there's like this hyper focus on women and children per se and this kind of discourse, as if like the lives of men, one, as if the lives of men are like worthless, and two, as if women and children have not been active participants in the struggle and in the resistance. Like that's actually the most important part. But in recent months, I've noticed people kind of criticize this women and children discourse, right? They want to include men, they want to include men in our advocacy, and we want to talk about Palestinian men. But even the way we kind of criticize that discourse, we recreate it, right? We're saying, stop saying women and children. Palestinian fathers are also so gentle. Palestinian fathers are so loving. Look at this video of the father holding his kid. But, hold on, I don't think you're going to like what I'm going to say. But actually, some Palestinian fathers are horrible. Just like most humans, like there are good humans, bad humans. And the idea that we can only advocate for people if they are perceived to be good is a massively problematic idea. Actually, some Palestinian people are obnoxious, annoying. Some of them are thieves. Some of them are not hospitable. Everybody loves to say Palestinians are hospitable. So you come to my house, I'm gonna give you water. That's it. Figure it out. And some of us have misogynistic views. Some of us have bad views because humanity at large does. This is not a revolutionary revelation, right? And still, even if we have these problematic views, or even if we have committed these quote-unquote sins, or we hold the wrong opinion, or we read the wrong book, or whatever, even if that still is not justification for killing us. And I find it quite concerning, right? For example, when they find there's a chapter in the book, my favorite chapter. It's called Mein Kampf in the Playroom, right? The Israeli military said that they found a copy of Mein Kampf in Gaza, right? And obviously, you could say that it's planted there. You could say that, it's fabricated. You could say it's Photoshop. You could say that, a lot of us were saying, actually, there's copies of Mein Kampf in all universities. You can find it everywhere. A lot of people were saying, what if the guy who had it just wanted to be a student of history? God forbid men have hobbies. But I think all of these reflexes kind of reiterate and reify the colonial logic that says that we need to be of good character, we need to portray good characteristics in order to not be bombed. Actually, if I had Mein Kampf in my house, you can't bomb me for having, like, that's not a reason to bomb me. Actually, I can have Mein Kampf and all of Hillary Clinton's books in my house, and you still shouldn't bomb me, right? But it's it's almost oversimplistic, the logic of the book that the book is trying to communicate. But I feel sometimes crazy having to scream it, because it's as though we've accepted the premise. It's as though we accepted the accusation and the charge, and we have to debunk it. Actually, no, you could find whatever you find in the Gaza Strip. You are still a colonizer. You still have no business being there. You still have no business killing people. And our resistance against you is justified, regardless. Yeah.
Bas? Yeah. I mean, it's making me think of a lot of things. It's making me think of, like, indeed, the long colonial history that, in a sense, it feels like, and maybe I'm biased because I'm Palestinian, but it feels like this bottleneck, you know, like that we're carrying this very heavy, hundreds of years of the civilized versus the uncivilized, you know? That this is now so blatant and clear. Social media is doing a lot to show and reveal with us, but it feels that this is not just towards Palestinians, that this is a very heavy history that we're carrying from the legacy of white colonial rule. And it makes me think a little bit about language and the way you've dealt with language in your book, because Edward Said also says that actually if you want to trace back coloniality, you can trace it back to the university. And it starts in I used to know the date, 1548 maybe, in Vienna. And it is the study of the other, and that the violence starts actually by the study of the other, by projecting a language, a European language, of observing and deciphering. And I was wondering, how have you, because your first book was a book of poetry, and I was wondering, how is it, what kind of decisions did you decide in like sticking to that? Because we talked a bit about the references, that you went back and you went back to the Palestinian classics. Yeah. And how did you can you walk us maybe a little bit through of how this influenced, like, I really feel like what you do in your text is you don't give it to me. You're making me work with you hard, focus, stay with me and stay with the poetry. And then there is beauty in there also. I'm going to stop here so that you can talk more than I do.
To be fully honest, the reason why the book is quote-unquote well-written is because I was like, if the argument falls, at least it's a really nice written book. Like, people will be like, oh, it's poetic. But honestly, I think the West, like the Western canon, like the West, as of recent, like after the Cold War, really hates sentimentality. You know, they think of you as like not a serious thinker when you are sentimental. And I wanted to just poke fun of that. So I wrote like the most flowery, lyrical, poetic book of political, like a political science, but it's super, super poetic. And it's because also I recognize that so many of the Arab readers or the Arabic speakers who will read this book will recognize that this is like very much written in the Arab tradition of like these super long sentences, beautiful, metaphors and so on. And two, it's because I wanted to challenge this notion that you have to be a certain way in order to be taken. I don't really believe in I don't really believe in being taken. Like, I don't want to be taken seriously per se. Like, that's not really my concern, to be taken seriously. So in the book, there's, I cite a lot of like academics and a lot of theory, but there's a lot of Palestinian proverbs. There's a part in the book where I'm talking about how my grandmother used to describe the Israelis, and she would say "min kul arya khariya," which is like like pieces of shit from all over the place. And it's this like, I just wanted to embrace this like tradition of irreverence in writing this book, because I can't just say like, oh, the Palestinian can be flawed and still deserve justice. I also wanted to model that irreverence by like making jokes in the book, or like kind of raising, I tried to raise the ceiling a little bit, or like, you know, going to territories where no one would go in English, or like we're told not to go in English. Like the last chapter in the book called "Do You Want to Throw Israelis into the Sea?" And it's a chapter about humor. So it's the whole thing was kind of to try to push people, and because I recognize that there's a chasm between us in the public eye and students. And working class people, I feel like for students and working class people, they're constantly taking risks. They're constantly putting themselves on the line, putting themselves in harm's way. And yet those of us in the public eye who have a degree of visibility, a degree of privilege, we toe the line often, and we're kind of scared to raise the ceiling. That's not to say that we don't face consequences and whatnot, and that there's not censorship or whatever. But I just feel like I want to belong to that camp that takes risks to make it easier for other people to say what they want to say. Because not all of us are highly educated, not all of us have memorized these polite scripts. Some of us are angry, and we want to articulate our anger in ways that sometimes are politically incorrect, and I think that's fully fine. Because you cannot compare quote-unquote semantic violence, the violence of language, to the violence of nukes and the violence of bombs, right? We are complaining about them bombing us, about them wiping entire families from the public registry, and they are complaining about how we speak about them, about our chants, about what's the secret meaning behind from the river to the sea. We're talking about policy and material violence, and they are talking constantly about what we call them. And I think that is the disparity, and you shouldn't give in to the trap. You should actually, I think, if you have the privilege, I think you should be more flippant and more unabashed and more obnoxious and say the wrong thing. Because it's not about language and it's not about what you say. It's about policy. It's about material violence. It's crazy that at a time where there's a genocide being waged, the conversation in the West is purely discursive.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I remember a year ago, people were still hesitating whether they could use the word genocide. And then the South Africans come all the way up to The Hague to tell people it's called genocide. And I thought that was a very poetic moment also, a little bit in the Dutch history as well. Yeah, you talk about, I have here a little quote, that we are robbed of the right to complexity and of contradictory feelings, and that our sadness is without teeth. And I felt that also carries on a little bit from what you're saying. And I kind of want to go back, I'm a bit tempted to go back to the gender issue that you mentioned a little bit earlier, because for me this is a bit of a concern also, this image perpetuated, two words, the women and children, the women and children. And also when you think about the images that we see in Gaza, from Gaza especially, you do see men, and men are actually doing all of the heavy lifting. They're the ones lifting the rubble, they're the ones carrying the bodies, they're the ones, you know, even if they don't, some of them don't have arms or whatever, and they're running to try and save. But they seem to be, yeah, they're demonized, they're shoved aside, and we have a huge problem here, because then, you know, everyone's fed like this masculine image of what it is to be a man, and not just in Palestine. I think we can have this conversation across the board. And then suddenly it's the women and children who are weak indeed. So I feel that the language towards both genders is highly problematic also. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit more about how you unpack that in the book?
Yani I wanted to do a chapter on it, but then I just decided that it was going to be a continuous thing. But essentially, I think the way it's framed, I think the problem itself is with the creation of the idea of the civilian. I know that sounds a bit controversial to say, But I think the civilian only exists in marginalized people, the requirement to be a civilian. And what I say by this is that when Russia invaded Ukraine, there were reports all over the place about Ukrainian civilians making Molotov cocktails, about Ukrainian soldiers taking off their clothes, wearing civilian garb, and blending into the local populace. And this was praised and glorified and valorized. It's like this tightly knit community, right? Ukrainian soldiers operated from within schools and hospitals, and Amnesty International said that it was a bit concerning that they were doing this. And the New York Times wrote about how that was like kind of a false accusation, and that they're in a densely populated place and they have no other places to fight from. Meanwhile, this same standard does not apply to Palestinians, right? They accuse us of having human shields. They accuse us of operating from, so one thing, there's this double standard, and obviously I think it's the easiest thing to talk about double standards, but there's this double standard where like there are Palestinian families who refuse to die but in each other's embrace, and these families are framed as like using human shields. Meanwhile, it's glamorized when it's done by others. I almost say when it's done by white people, but I hesitate to use this because it's not really about your color of your skin, it's about your proximity to the empire. Because anybody who takes a look at the north of Ireland can say that whiteness did not really help them. Well, controversial. But in the context of gender, this framing of the civilian kind of puts and frames women and children as these like bystanders who are like helplessly watching as these men wreak havoc in their spaces. But this is not the truth. Women and children are very much involved, and it's not shameful. It's actually very beautiful and heroic. They're very much involved in the struggle, be it discursively in creating the literature, but also in hiding the fida'is and the revolutionaries in their homes, in nursing them to health, in actually being, women have consistently been revolutionaries throughout the Palestinian struggle all the time. When a Palestinian village is being raided by the Israeli military, the mosque minarets will announce that there's an invasion and everybody knows to hide their kids. That is not complicity or collusion with terrorists. That is what a tight-knit society, this is what love looks like. It's pure love, and it's forbidden from us. It's prevented. We're being told constantly that you have to create these categories that exist nowhere else in the world, where women and children have to be these like fully neutral, fully non-partisan, dismayed characters. But in reality, it's quite complicated, and it's quite complicated everywhere in the world. There has never been a conflict where not everybody has been implicated. Same thing goes for journalists. The Jewish Syndicate is a paper in the States that published this report that said 2/3 of journalists killed in Gaza were affiliated with Hamas, right? And of course we can argue and we can prove that they are not affiliated by Hamas or whatever, but what's more powerful is saying, so what? We can also say, so what? Because so many New York Times journalists have sons in the Israeli military. The Jerusalem bureau chief have 2 children in the Israeli military. Her husband is an organization that's tasked with keeping a positive image of Israel in the West. You look at Bloomberg, you look at the Atlantic, the editor-in-chief of the Atlantic volunteered on his own dime to go to Israel to become a prison guard, and admitted in his book to watching his co-workers, violate the human rights of Palestinians, and yet they are without scrutiny. They can write about Palestine, about Israel without scrutiny, and yet our journalists are demanded to be these puritanical creatures, but that simply does not exist. So instead of disavowing the affiliation, I think it's more important and more powerful, more compelling to highlight the fallacious nature of the underlying logic.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one to talk about. Would you like to talk about Shireen's passport and the threshold? Because that one was a... Yeah, there's in this chapter, I mean, it was... Yeah, I don't know, it's a bit of a difficult one for me to talk about also. Like Shireen Abu Akla's body it's still very fresh memory of how her body lie there and how much it symbolized and how much it held. And I also felt in that moment that so quickly did it become about her American citizenship. I was actually confused before I got angry, and I was like, am I supposed to get angry? And it almost diffused the monumentality of this person, you know, that image of her body on the floor, and how much she took with her, of loss, of power, and I think this one was also maybe through your book, I realized that was maybe one of the moments in which I realized that people are trying to use different language, and it's really going the wrong way. It's really feeding into downplaying, becoming weak, actually, essentially. I found it weak that all we had to say about this person was that, to demand uproar was that she was an American citizen.
Yeah, and this Americanness does not give you anything except, maybe you'll get a headline when the average Palestinian will not. But beyond this headline, you'll get more of, there'll be more condemnation for your killing because you're perceived to be American. But beyond that, it divorces you from your people. Shireen Abu Akleh was, in 2002, as a journalist, as an Al Jazeera correspondent, in 2002, she was digging with her bare hands in the rubble, looking for martyrs during the Jenin invasion of 2002. When the Israelis were kicked out of Gaza in 2005, she celebrated on air. She is one of us through and through, and yet in her death, we exiled her outside of us. We said, she's just neutral journalist who was targeted. And that she was targeted because she was a journalist. No, she was targeted because she was Palestinian. And in our advocacy, in our mourning, in our trying to get her justice, we also erased her Palestinianness. And I know, I get we say these things are strategies. I get that we are kind of forced to do these things, but we seldom think about the long-term effects of these things. What does it do? When less than 20 days after Shireen Abu Akleh was killed, what does it do to your psyche as a Palestinian when you observe this? Shireen Abu Akleh was killed, there was international uproar, as it should be. 20 days later, another Palestinian journalist was killed, another woman was killed, and there was no uproar whatsoever. Little uproar in Arabic, nothing in English. What does that say to you as a Palestinian? It tells you that your value is determined by the documents you hold. And you live your whole life kind of despising the condition that you are brought into, and it makes you an individual. It makes you aspire to become an individual, to want to abandon the collective. And I think that's in addition to the absolute main tragedy, which is her killing, her martyrdom. But I think that is also the tragedy in how we advocate for these people, is that we exile them from our midst. But okay. Somebody objects. But okay, give me your attention again. But when I was writing that chapter, I was writing also about a Palestinian American man named Omar Asad, and about how we also just focused about the fact that he was American. This was an 80-year-old man who the Israelis, arrested, blindfolded, and left to die in the cold. But I realized upon finishing writing the chapter that I actually spent maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours, desperately looking for evidence that he was beaten too. Because somewhere in my psyche, somewhere deep inside my subconscious, it wasn't enough that this man was blindfolded and left to die in the cold. I needed him to have been beaten too in order for me to make him a convincing victim to my readers, right? So these things, these kind of strategies that I'm constantly creating in this book, and it's really like a bit arrogant to write a book of critique, like critiquing people for what they do. But all of these strategies that I'm constantly critiquing in this book, I myself, I'm guilty of them. I tried my best to be transparent in like all of my impulses and instincts, because these are instincts that are drilled into us by colonial logic, and that we have to reject them if we want to be. I'm not saying this argument is to liberate the land. But I'm saying I might be, bold and say that this argument is about liberating your mind, at least. It's about not extending the occupation to your psyche.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. It feels like you're constantly, we're walking a tightrope. In the way you're framing it, you're just making me think. I'm thinking as I speak. I haven't prepared for this part, so. But to try and unpack it, because I've often also thought a lot about the language that I write in, which is English, and not Arabic, but still trying to go towards the Arabic to learn from there, to make sure that we hold on to whatever ways of describing our world, as you said, that doesn't even follow the logic of like, I don't know, English, I guess, would be imperial or empire or colonial speak. And that in itself it's a little bit of a catch, because indeed you've written your book in English, but you're following an Arabic language logic there. And this is maybe perhaps finding ways of new ways, actually, of writing in our current time. Spotlights. And I don't know, have you been inspired by earlier writers that maybe you read from it doesn't have to be only Palestinian, but maybe in Arabic, who've given you something to hold on to follow? Maybe in poetry as well, because we haven't talked about your earlier book, and there was a request from a friend of mine for poetry tonight, so I don't know. You can. Yes, she said, we need poetry.
Actually, I think it's an excellent question, and I think I don't want to give names because I can't think and I can, but I think I'll say what I'm attracted to is transparency. I feel I'm addicted to I love writers who are honest, and people who are honest, and people who are without pretenses, and who refuse to perform a role. I think the most inspiring thing, it wasn't even a book, it was, I think, a meme or a video or something. But I think the most inspiring thing, honestly, the genesis of this really was, there was an invasion, I believe, of Jenin a few months ago, or a year or so ago. And, a man was coming home to his apartment in Jenin, and there was, sounds of bombs in the distance and bullets and stuff like this. And there's a tank right in front of his house, an armored vehicle. And he's holding his phone and he's recording this atrocious invasion. And he walks up to the vehicle and he says, "How many times did I tell you not to park your tank in front of my house?" Right? And I think that's really, to me, it's hilarious, but I think it's dignity. I think it's so dignifying, because here are these tanks and these soldiers and this occupation and this, this expansionist colonial settler regime that is eating away at your land and eating away at your resources and your water and air, and they're everywhere, and they look into your bedroom and they're spying on you through your phone. And you're telling them, "Oh, I'm not going to allow you to break my spirit. I'm still going to find a joke in this." When our house in 2021 was being under the threat of forced expulsion by the Israeli settlers, I remember the first thing I came home. I was studying abroad, and I went home, and the first thing I told my mother, this is the entire family is there, and everyone is there. and everybody's in distress about what's happening. And the first thing I told my mother, I was like, our furniture is so old, when they throw it in the street, all the press is going to take photos of our ugly furniture. We need to buy new furniture. And there were like countless moments of this that really, I think, carry you through the occupation. This isn't to minimize, obviously, the fucking price of the occupation, the brutal agony of the occupation. But everywhere you see people console themselves with this kind of humor, with this kind of irreverence, with this kind of honesty. And you see others letting them know, and you have to perform a certain affect. You have to be docile, you have to scare, you have to cry, blah, blah, blah. No, the bombs speak for themselves. Let people behave how they want to behave.
I'm looking for Zoe because we have to keep track of the time. So Zoe, where are you?
I'm here.
And the time?
If you start questions in 5 minutes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Do you want to maybe... No, I have any more questions. Do you feel like there's something you want to... Your second more... No? Okay. The request for questions... I would just really like to ask you to formulate it in your head before you say it, because microphones can be very stressful, and then you don't know what you're going to say, and then we take up a lot of time, and we don't go out time. Oh wow, you have Adriaan.
Question, not speeches.
I'll take care. Hoeveel kijk heeft?
Hello. Sorry in advance for my English. I'm trying my best. A question that came up in mind when you were talking about the centrality of the Palestinian voice without having to go through Western sources. And sorry, but here in Belgium, in the pro-Palestine solidarity movement, there are Palestinians, of course, and some of them support the Palestinian Authority and support a Zionist, liberal Zionist political line. And well, as I said, they're involved in the movement, in NGOs and stuff, and they advance sometimes with harshness their Palestinian identity to legitimize their what they're saying as a kind of an absolute argument. And yet, other Palestinian activists who support a clear anti-Zionist decolonial political line don't even need to advance this Palestinian identity so much. And I wanted to ask, how do you deal with the importance of the centrality of Palestinian voices without it being a means to, for some, to propagate a liberal Zionist line and sometimes even participate in the repression of organizations who support Free Palestine from the river to the sea, the Palestinian resistance, even the armed resistance, the right of return for all the refugees, and the liberation of...
Sorry, it's just because we don't have time, but an excellent question. I got a question. I think it's an excellent question, and you're absolutely right. And I hope the takeaway wasn't that we need to center Palestinian voices. In fact, the following pieces in the book are precisely against this. And as I said, when we center Jewish voices for the sake of their being Jewish solely, it's fallacious. And I think when we center Palestinian voices for the sake of them being Palestinian solely, it's fallacious. Because you are absolutely right. Misapprehending identity and misapprehending identity politics will often result in elite capture. It will often result in, centrist or liberal or people who are more likely to compromise, or people who are more allied with power, to take over the discourse and harness it in their favor. You are absolutely right about this. So it should be ultimately not about identity, but about the content of one's character, which is, a maxim that's like 1,000 years old. It's a very, very basic idea. I reject the idea that somebody cannot speak about somebody because they're not Palestinian. I reject the idea that it's about your material reality. It's about not only the material violence that you have endured, but the kind of material conditions that you live through day and day. What are you willing to sacrifice? What are you going from? These are important things. And I never want to argue against non-Palestinians writing about Palestine or Jewish people talking about Palestine. I want everybody to speak about Palestine. But if we are asking, an Israeli historian to speak to this audience because we believe this audience is racist and will only respond to an Israeli historian, I think it bears saying, hey, we're bringing you this Israeli historian, but this is not a testament to their excellence. It's an indictment of your refusal to listen to Palestinians. It's an indictment of your own racism. That's what I'm trying to argue about. And I absolutely agree with you that, not only in Palestinian context, but in the Black Liberation movement, this misapprehending of identity has allowed the rich, the upwardly mobile, to hijack the causes and make them any more docile or defanged or liberalized, whatever. So I think in all cases we just should have one standard, and we should just not rely on identity, particularly as we realize today that I think it might be crazy to say this as a genocide is taking place, but as a genocide is taking place and as so many Palestinians are being slaughtered and murdered, there is a market for Palestinians at the same time, right? As people are being slaughtered and murdered, people want to hear, and certainly just people want to hear from Palestinians. And people want to hire Palestinian artists, and people want to invite me to speak at festivals. And it's important to critically, to have critical viewership, critical readership, to be a critical consumer of media, be you the Palestinian or an Israeli or Western. It's about really the content, the material conditions, rather than just identity. Because, I was at the Oxford debate just 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, and the Israeli team had 2 Palestinians on Congress side. So you're absolutely right. No? Yeah.
Thank you. It's a very short and simple question. Actually, it is the first time I meet someone from real Palestine. I'm not Palestinian, but I was born in Lebanon, so I'm glad to meet you today. My question is, how do people there in Palestine or in Jerusalem, how they do live their daily life in fear, how they grow up in fear? Do they have plans for in the future, or just they live day by day? Thank you.
Thank you. Should we do 2 more so we answer? I'll also take it, Alger. Thank you.
Hello, Mohammed. I just would like to take quickly. I appreciate the facts that you shared from the podium. I completely agree as Palestinian also from Gaza. And I express similar sentiments here in Baja, But I find it truly, I would like to say, challenging to change people's minds, to listen sometimes, to the Palestinians, because there's a lot of non-Palestinians promoting decisions or visions about Palestine, or, So and then I have a small initiative here in Brussels, and they do host guests that I try to reach out to you via Jihad Abu Salim, which is this brother of mine. So I always would, friends like Sajist and Mays, always say Palestinians first, here for everyone. If you are involved in something similar, always the Palestinian voices, because what I face as a challenge that we now don't only want to change or raise awareness for those who are on board, but those who are on board also, they have ideas they got from non-Palestinians, and we need also to fight those ideas. So it's really, making big damage to us as Palestinians, So, and and the thing, like for the movies, what I would like to say, in my opinion, I'm sorry, bear with me. Like when they, friends tell me that there is this Israeli Palestinian movie, and I see it very hypocritical, and I directly tell them, if this person is really cares about us, and this Israeli person, director or whatever, the first thing that this person should do is to decolonize, and leave. You don't, live in our ethnic cleansing, and literally in my home, I'm from Jaffa, originally, but expelled 1948, my grandfather took us, and from you, privileged, after our, because our genocide, and you say this is gold from this golden tower, and you say, nice Palestinians. No, you don't want to leave. Go live in the refugees camps, the same separate as Palestinians separate, and then you go through the hell that we are living, And then if you want to stay in Palestine, you stay there as a real, revolutions who went side by side, shoulder to shoulder Palestinians, not shouting from their houses that you live in. You know what I mean? So we go, For Ilan Pape, for example, I'm sorry, what do you think, for example, he's an example, he says I hope that Israelis do not leave, So what do you comment on similar, ideas and visions from non-Palestinian Palestinians to, such an idea? I would like them to stay. Palestinians should live side to side, to be Israelis, and are just in shit. Thanks so much.
Okay. So I find the discourse around irreverent language really cuts it. And as somebody who comes from a Punjabi cultural tradition, I know that anti-colonial discourses in Punjabi are a lot more irreverent than how we would speak in English, or when we kind of had conversations within the imperial sphere. And I think part of the reason why code switching is important is because it protects us. So where do you see the importance of irreverence? Where would you draw the lines to make sure that we're still protected, and that our struggle does not get open wide through the fact that people then can start understanding the code switching?
I'll start with you. Thank you. I think we were talking about this in the train earlier, and it was a kind of a hasty generalization, but I think it holds some truth in that. I think hardship and living under occupation has made people bolder and braver. Meanwhile, comfort and living in the valley of the geese has made people, in a certain way, more scared to be, bold or whatever word you want to use. But again, the question to me, everything, be it the question about Palestinian identity or the question about irreverence or whatever, it all has to do with the material conditions. If you are a student in this country, or if you are a person who's on temporary papers, or if you are a person who's working class or struggling to keep food on the table, I am not asking you to be a hero. But if you are a professor, and you are rich, and you are tenured, and you are at no risk of losing your job, and you're on the brink of retirement, and the worst thing you're going to suffer is 3 bad headlines about you, then yes, you can afford to be more irreverent. That's the theory. I'm not asking, I'm not asking people to go and just throw themselves into the line of fire. I'm asking people to assess their privilege and see what they're capable of doing. Because to me, it seems that the people with the least oftentimes get the most, and that has to change. The question about Palestinians first, again, I agree with you in theory about Palestinians first, whatever, but I think it's a bit more profound than this, because you and I know that there are Palestinians who there are, like, lived experience alone does not give you, the moral clarity. It doesn't give you the skill and expertise, and also a lot of Palestinians have more lived experience, because they are not a lot. There's like a lot of people in the public sphere can perhaps come from feudal Lord's families, are capitalists, blah blah, are avoiding certain privileges, others are not. So I think that is the danger. But of course, we should constantly try to give Palestinians the center stage on the condition that it's with good quality. And also, I think I like what you said about. Talking to your friends about having critiques about these movies. I think I agree with your critique, but I also think more broadly, this is what's missing from our culture, is debate and critique and criticism. We look at these things like, if you made a movie and I told you, here are my problems with your movie, or if you came to me and you told me, here are my problems with your book, because we're so marginalized, I would take it as this is an attack on me. This is an attack on me as Palestinian. But I actually think debate and criticism will really raise our ceiling. It will open more dimensions for us. It will create more opportunities. The question about Ilan Pape, I haven't heard him say this. I know, I'm saying that I don't know. I have a rule of not engaging in hypothetical questions, to be honest. And I don't give a shit where settlers go after Palestine is liberated. I just want Palestine to be liberated, and everything, all the domino pieces will fall into place. I think these are kind of trap questions that they ask us about to kind of get us to think. Not you, but they need the question about. I know you didn't ask this, but there are questions about what do you want to do, what do you want to do to the settlers, and like 1 state, 2 states, 3 states, whatever. They're all like silly questions because, and in reality, it is 1 state, and in reality, the West Bank is fully annexed, and in reality, they have swallowed all of our land, and in reality, there are bombs and demolitions, and that's the focal point to me. It's not the future of the settler. I could not give a fuck, The question about Palestinian future. It goes to the future. The future is like getting married, or we think about the future. I don't know, But we think about the future, sure, in that way. But I do think that being under occupation kind of traps you in this loop of being. To me, the future is inconceivable. I've been saying to my friends for the past year, and I just want the war to end. I cannot even imagine the day after. And yet there are people who are like talking about rebuilding Gaza and the conference for rebuilding Gaza, and like the day after, who's going to govern Gaza and blah, blah, blah. And to us, a lot of us are still fatigued. We just want the war to end. We just want all these people to return home. So I think I'm not going to give you a question just as it's a very good question, but I think it depends. But I think most people, at least in Jerusalem, we have managed, to almost pretend as though the occupation is a bureaucratic nuisance, right? That it's, you get the home demolition thing, but there's such a collective fate because everybody else is getting home demolitions. So you don't feel of course you feel like the tragedy and you feel if you're a victim, but you don't feel particularly crushed by it because your fate is that of others, and I think that gives you power. خلاص الله ينتهي. I'm going to stop.
You sure?
Yeah.
Yeah, bro? Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for coming. Now we have Hala and Adriaan. Are you guys? Yeah, there are. Come in.
How grim to convince the world that we are dying. Mohammed el-Kurd summarized it best. There is no room for debate in the presence of burning flesh. We're sitting here in this Hala, in the Rifat al-Arir building, which still echoes the voices of the students of Ghent who occupied it just months ago. What are we doing? What hasn't been said? Panels, endless debates, pallets of Palestine, cultural events. While the ground trembles with grief, still the earth swallows our voices full. أنا من هناك أنا من هنا ولست هناك ولست هنا. I'm from there. I'm from here. I am not there. I'm not here. Every child in Gaza is me. Every mother and father is me. Every house is my heart. Every tree is my leg. Every plant is my arm. Every flower is my eye. Every hole in the earth is my wound. Our newsfeeds are funeral homes, memorial services, obituary pages. Here, every footstep is a grave. In the morning, we wake from our temporary death to await our permanent death. Can we take a rest? Maybe die for a few months or years and wake up when the flowers in our garden start to grow? Colonizers write about flowers. I tell you about children throwing rocks at Israeli tanks seconds before becoming daisies. I want to be like those poets who care about the moon. Palestinians don't see the moon from jail cells. Who am I to think of surviving? I'm not a bird, nor have I ever held a cloud in my hand. I'll say we survived, but what survival is this? We roam the corners of our streets in our imagination, imagining ruins in our minds, retracing every door, every tray bolt, every thread, the memories that we've lost. The war devours everything. Every moment teaches us its cost. What does it mean to be safe in times of war? What does it mean to be safe in times of war? It means being ashamed. Ashamed of your smile, of your ward, of your clean clothes, your cup of water, your standing house, your restful sleep, your yawning. Ashamed for incidentally being alive. It means bathing in rubble, searching for food amongst ruins, burning school books to keep warm. We are alive until further notice. Oh God, I don't want to be a poet in times of war. Every missile screams a new silence into the earth, louder than any prayer. The rubble remembers everything. The cracks in the walls whisper names. The streets are veins running red with unanswered questions. Colors here do not have the luxury of being chosen. Red, you are full of blood. Gray, you have just embraced you and your neighbors' homes and stones and come out breathing. You wonder where your people disappear, then you're surprised by spots of blood, a single foot, 5 fingers still clutching for tomorrow answer you in silence. Every time a rocket hits a place, many birds soar behind the smoke and remnants of clouds, attending the funeral of another child that was taken by war, mourning the hand of a child that would have fed them grains the next morning, but his hand is gone. Many children sleep side by side, tired from long laughter, from screaming and usual mischief. It's okay. Sleep from your exhaustion. Perhaps you will stay asleep. Perhaps no one will hear a sound from now on from your fragile bodies as soon as they are pierced by malicious shrapnel. The missile falls, the explosion resonates, the man embraces his child, little girls cry, the mother prays with her heart filled with the pain of days. And words doze off for a long, long time, except for the cries of the caller at the funeral. We lose a friend, and we weep at the table where the dead are washed quickly and for just a few minutes. No room for prolonged grief. Life must go on. Life must go on. Our feet must take a rest from running by funerals to prepare for running behind the shells. One by one, they transform into coffins. Yet even in the sea of death, we dare to dream. The children pace. From the ashes they summon life with colors brighter than your missiles, hope sharper than your shrapnel. Little hands draw freedom where the world sees ruin. Every stroke projects despair. Every color declares, we are staying here. The poet says, the poem must emerge from under the rubble. Poetry says, oh, how romantic, what a dreamy world. The poem says, I have to push the tons of crumbling concrete on my head, iron armored ceilings, columns stained with heads and organs. I have to move, crying walls adorned with the saddest verses of God. We deserve to die a boring death. We deserved a better death. Our bodies are disfigured and twisted, embroidered with bullets and shrapnel. Our names pronounced incorrectly on the radio and on TV. I want to die whole, a warm body capable of being hugged. The first right we learned was the right to live, and now we fight for the right to die. I'm a Palestinian writer, 25 and full of dreams. I do not consent to my death being passing news. Metaphors about death are for poets who think evil listens to words. When I die, I promise to haunt you forever. One day, I'll write about this watermelon like we own it, not as some symbol of oppression or resistance, just a mere fruit of a homeland that we will meet again. Sweet and ripe under the shade of the olive tree, a fruit that doesn't carry the weight of checkpoints or genocide, but simply belongs in our gardens, planted in our soil, alive in our hands, a taste of liberation long denied, finally reclaimed, free, and ours to taste again.